The dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through the small attic window as I pushed aside another cardboard box, my back already aching from an hour of sorting through 20 years of accumulated memories. We were finally getting ready to sell the house where Sarah and I had planned to raise our children, where we'd painted nurseries and hung growth charts on door frames that would never mark a child's progress. I was looking for Christmas decorations, something practical and harmless, when my fingers brushed against a small white shoebox tucked behind a larger container of old photo albums. For a moment, I didn't recognize it. The corners were slightly yellowed with age, and there was a small water stain on one side from the roof leak we'd had repaired 5 years ago. But as I pulled it closer and saw my own handwriting on the side, Emma's first shoes, size 1, the world seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands began to shake as I held the box, and I had to sit down on the dusty wooden floor, my back against the slanted wall. Emma. Our Emma. I hadn't said her name out loud in months, maybe longer. Sarah and I had learned, through painful trial and error, that there were words that could slice through the careful normalcy we'd built around our grief, and our daughter's name was the sharpest of them all. I set the box in my lap, but couldn't bring myself to open it. Not yet. Instead, I closed my eyes and let myself remember the day I'd bought those shoes, 3 months before Emma was born. Sarah had been 6 months pregnant, glowing in that way everyone talks about, but you never really understand until you see it yourself. We'd gone to the baby store downtown, the one that's been there since the 1950s, with wooden floors that creaked and sales ladies who called everyone honey. Sarah had been practical about most things for the baby. We'd bought the necessities first: car seat, crib, changing table, bottles. But when we walked past the tiny shoe display, something in her face changed. She stopped walking and just stared at this impossibly small pair of white leather shoes with pink roses embroidered on the toes. "She'll need shoes eventually," Sarah had whispered, running her finger along the soft leather, "for when she starts pulling herself up, for her first steps." The sales lady, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, had smiled at us. First-time parents? We'd nodded, and I'd watched Sarah's hand drift to her belly in that unconscious way pregnant women do, as if she were already protecting our daughter from the world. "Those are beautiful shoes," the woman had continued. "We've had mothers come back years later to buy the same style for granddaughters. They hold up wonderfully, and they're perfect for those wobbly first steps." I'd bought them without hesitation. $7.50 for shoes that were no bigger than my thumb. Sarah had protested half-heartedly about spending money on something Emma wouldn't need for months, but I could see how much she loved them. That night, she'd taken them out of the box 3 separate times, holding them up to the lamplight and marveling at how small they were. "Can you imagine her feet being this tiny?" she'd asked me, and I'd tried, but it was impossible then. Impossible to picture anything beyond the abstract concept of baby. Emma wasn't real to me yet, not the way she was to Sarah, who felt her moving and kicking and hiccuping inside her. Now, sitting in the attic with the shoebox in my lap, I could imagine it perfectly. I could picture exactly how small Emma's feet had been, because I'd held them. I'd counted her 10 perfect toes while she lay in the NICU, connected to machines that breathed for her when her own lungs couldn't quite manage. I'd traced the soft curve of her heel with my finger while Sarah slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, exhausted from 3 days of labor that had gone wrong in ways the doctors couldn't predict or prevent. Emma had lived for 6 days. 6 days of hopes rising and falling with every beep of the monitors, every consultation with doctors who used words like complications and uncertain and difficult to say. 6 days of Sarah and me taking turns holding her, singing to her, reading her the books we'd already bought for her nursery. 6 days of believing that love could be enough, that wanting something desperately enough could make it happen. On the 6th day, a Tuesday morning in October when the maple tree outside the hospital window was at its most brilliant red, Emma's heart simply stopped. There was no dramatic moment, no rush of medical personnel. One moment the monitor was beeping its steady rhythm, and the next, there was just the long, flat sound that meant everything had changed forever. I opened my eyes and looked down at the shoebox again. After the funeral, Sarah had packed away everything that belonged to Emma. The clothes we'd bought, the blankets my mother had knitted, the mobile that played Brahms' lullaby. She'd done it methodically, carefully, folding each item with the same precision she'd used to prepare the nursery. I'd wanted to help, but she'd asked me not to. She'd needed to do it herself, she said, needed to say goodbye to each thing individually. I didn't remember seeing the shoes among the things she'd packed. I must have put them up here myself, probably in those first few months when everything hurt too much to think clearly. There had been weeks when I'd found things in strange places: coffee cups in the bathroom medicine cabinet, car keys in the refrigerator, important mail mixed in with old newspapers. Grief, I'd learned, was not just an emotion but a physical force that could rearrange your brain, make you forget how to do simple things like sleep through the night or remember to eat lunch. The attic was getting warmer as the afternoon progressed, and sweat was beginning to gather at the back of my neck. Below me, I could hear Sarah moving around in the kitchen, probably packing dishes and wondering why I was taking so long to find a simple box of Christmas ornaments. We'd been married for 25 years now, and after Emma, we'd learned to give each other space for our grief, to not ask too many questions when one of us needed to disappear for a while. But this felt different. Finding these shoes felt like Emma had left me a message, some kind of sign that I was supposed to find them now, at this moment when we were preparing to leave the only home she'd ever known. The rational part of my mind knew this was magical thinking, the kind of thing grief counselors warned about. But the rational part of my mind had proven remarkably unreliable when it came to matters of the heart. I lifted the lid of the shoebox. The shoes were exactly as I remembered them: white leather with pink roses, still wrapped in the original tissue paper. But there was something else in the box, something I'd forgotten about. Underneath the shoes was a small piece of paper with Sarah's handwriting. For Emma's first steps, whenever she's ready to take them. The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I was crying in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not the careful, controlled tears I'd learned to manage, but the raw, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. The shoes blurred in my vision as I held them. These perfect little shoes that would never touch the ground, never carry my daughter across a playground or into my arms when she was scared. I don't know how long I sat there crying in the attic, surrounded by boxes of our past, holding my daughter's shoes and my wife's hope in my hands. But eventually, the tears stopped, and I was left with something I hadn't felt in a long time: the need to talk about Emma, not to a grief counselor or a support group, but to Sarah. To remember our daughter together instead of separately, to say her name out loud, and let it exist in the air between us. I made my way down from the attic slowly, still clutching Emma's shoes against my chest like they might disappear if I loosened my grip. The ladder creaked under my weight, and each step down felt like descending from one world into another, from the suspended time of memory back into the reality of our quiet house, where Sarah and I had learned to move around each other like polite strangers sharing the same space. The hallway felt longer than usual as I walked toward the kitchen, where I could hear the soft sounds of Sarah making dinner. It was Tuesday, which meant it would be pasta with that marinara sauce she made from scratch, the one Emma would have loved if she'd lived long enough to try it. Sarah still cooked like she was feeding a family instead of just the two of us, and we'd eat the leftovers for days, neither of us acknowledging that she was cooking for 3 out of habit, out of hope, out of the inability to let go of the life we'd planned. I paused at the kitchen doorway, watching my wife move with the same graceful efficiency she'd always had. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing the curve of her neck that I used to kiss every morning before work. When was the last time I'd kissed her there? When was the last time I'd kissed her at all? Really kissed her. Not just the perfunctory pecks we exchanged in passing like we were checking off boxes on a list of things married people do. She was humming something under. Her breath, a lullaby, I realized, with a sharp pain in my chest. It was the same one she used to sing to Emma during those precious few months we had with her. The melody drifted across the kitchen like a ghost, and I wondered if Sarah even realized she was doing it, or if it was just another way our daughter lived on in the small, unconscious habits we couldn't shake. "Sarah," I said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and I saw her register the shoes in my hands. Her face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Surprise, recognition, pain, and then that careful blankness she'd perfected over the past 3 years. It was the same look she got whenever anything about Emma came up unexpectedly, like she was pulling down a curtain to protect herself from feeling too much. "Where did you find those?" she asked, her voice steady but small. "In the attic. in a box with some of your things from before she was born." I held them out slightly, and she stared at them like they might bite her. "Do you remember buying them?" She was quiet for a long moment, the wooden spoon in her hand dripping sauce onto the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. "Of course I remember," she said finally. "It was at that little boutique on 5th Street, the one that closed down last year. I could see her there in my mind, 6 months pregnant, glowing with that happiness that had made her beautiful in a way that went beyond the physical. She'd insisted on buying something for the baby even though we'd agreed to wait until after she was born, when we knew for sure she was healthy. But Sarah had seen those tiny white shoes with their delicate lace trim and said they were perfect for a little girl's first steps. I was going to save them for when she started walking," Sarah continued, turning back to the stove and stirring the sauce with more force than necessary. I thought they'd be special. Her first real shoes, not just those soft little socks with the grip bottoms." The silence that followed was the kind we'd become experts at, heavy with everything we weren't saying, filled with the presence of our daughter who should have been here, should have been 3 years old now, running around the kitchen in those very shoes, probably getting sauce on her fingers and wiping them on whatever she could reach. "Sarah," I said again, and this time she didn't turn around. "We need to talk about her." "No, we don't." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. "We've talked about her. We've talked her to death with therapists and grief counselors and everyone who thinks they know what's best for us. That's not the same thing, and you know it." She set the spoon down harder than necessary, and finally faced me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What do you want me to say, Michael? That I think about her every day? That I still set up her nursery in my mind every morning when I wake up? That I see her in every little girl we pass on the street and wonder what she would have looked like, what her laugh would have sounded like, whether she would have had my eyes or yours?" The words came out in a rush, like a dam bursting, and I realized this was the most she'd said about Emma in months. We'd gotten so good at skating around the edges of our grief, mentioning her only in the past tense, and only when absolutely necessary, that I'd forgotten what it sounded like when Sarah let herself really feel it. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what I want you to say." She stared at me for a moment, and then her face crumpled. "I can't," she whispered. "If I start talking about her, really talking about her, I'm afraid I'll never stop. I'm afraid I'll just break apart completely and never put myself back together again." I crossed the kitchen then, still holding Emma's shoes, and pulled Sarah into my arms. She was stiff at first, resistant, but then she melted against me and started crying in earnest, the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from 3 years of holding back an ocean of grief. "I miss her so much," she said against my shoulder. "I miss her so much it feels like dying sometimes." "I know," I whispered into her hair. "I know, baby. I miss her too." We stood there in our kitchen, holding each other and crying for our daughter while the marinara sauce bubbled on the stove and the smell of garlic filled the air. It was the first time we'd really held each other since the funeral, the first time we'd let ourselves be broken in front of each other instead of trying to be strong for the other person's sake. "I dream about her," Sarah said eventually, pulling back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I dream that she's here, that she's fine, that she's just sleeping in her crib, and then I wake up and remember, and it's like losing her all over again." "Tell me about the dreams," I said, and I meant it. For 3 years we'd been afraid of our memories of Emma, afraid that talking about her would make the pain worse. But sitting there in the attic, holding those tiny shoes, I'd realized that the silence wasn't protecting us. It was killing us slowly, letting our grief fester in isolation instead of healing together. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. "In the dreams, she's walking," she said. "She's wearing those shoes, the ones you found, and she's taking her first steps toward me. She's laughing, and she has your smile, and she's saying, 'Mama,' clear as day. And I'm so happy in the dream, Michael. I'm so happy I feel like I could fly." The image hit me like a punch to the chest, beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. I could see it too. Our little girl with Sarah's dark hair and my stubborn chin, toddling across the living room in those white shoes, her arms out for balance, that look of pure concentration that babies get when they're learning something new. "What else?" I asked, because I needed to know. needed to hear about the daughter who lived on in Sarah's dreams, even if she couldn't live anywhere else. "She's so smart," Sarah said, a small smile breaking through her tears. "In the dreams, she's always so smart. She knows all her colors and she can count to 10 and she loves books. She sits in my lap while I read to her, and she points at the pictures and makes up stories about what the characters are doing." I thought about the nursery upstairs, still exactly as we'd left it, with its carefully chosen books and the mobile of little animals that we'd never had a chance to wind up and watch spin above her crib. Sarah had spent hours researching the best books for babies, the ones with high-contrast images that would help with visual development, the classic stories we wanted to share with our daughter. "She would have loved your reading voice," I said. "Remember how you used to read to her when she was still in your belly? You'd put your hands on your stomach and read Goodnight Moon over and over." Sarah laughed, a watery sound but genuine. "You said I was going to spoil her before she was even born. Maybe I was right," I said, and for a moment, it felt almost normal to talk about Emma this way, to remember the anticipation and joy instead of just the loss. She probably would have had us wrapped around her little finger from day one. "She did," Sarah said softly. "She already did." We sat there in the quiet aftermath of shared tears, the shoes still resting between us on the coffee table like a bridge we'd finally decided to cross. Sarah reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. We hadn't held hands in so long that I'd forgotten how perfectly hers fit into mine, how her thumb would trace small circles on my skin when she was thinking. "I've been so angry," she whispered, not looking at me but staring at Emma's shoes. Not just sad, but angry. At God, at the doctors, at you, at myself, at Emma, sometimes, for leaving us. Her voice cracked on our daughter's name, but she didn't stop. I felt so guilty for being angry at a baby, our baby, but I couldn't help it. Why did she have to go? Why couldn't she just stay? I squeezed her hand tighter. "I know. I've been angry too. At everything. Everyone. At the couple in the grocery store with their screaming toddler, wondering why they got to keep theirs and we couldn't keep ours. At the mailman who still delivers baby formula coupons. At myself for not knowing something was wrong sooner." Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes red but clear. "The doctors said there was nothing we could have done differently. Nothing anyone could have done. I know what they said." I had replayed Dr. Martinez's words 1,000 times, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones were two different things. SIDS, they said. Sudden infant death syndrome. Such clinical words for something that tore our world apart. No warning, no explanation, just gone. We'd learned more about SIDS in the weeks following Emma's death than any parent should ever have to know. The peak risk at 2 to 4 months old. Emma was 12 weeks. The higher risk for premature babies. Emma was born 2 weeks early. The fact that it could happen to perfectly healthy babies with no warning signs. Emma had been thriving. Every statistic felt like another small knife. Each fact a reminder that we'd done everything right and still lost everything. "I keep thinking about that morning," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How normal it was. You made coffee. I fed Emma. We talked about maybe taking her to the park later that day if the weather stayed nice. She seemed so content after her bottle, so sleepy and peaceful. I put her down for her nap and thought I'd get some laundry done. I remembered that morning too. Every mundane detail, now seared into my memory with painful clarity. The way Emma had looked up at us with those serious dark eyes, as if she was trying to memorize our faces. How she'd gripped my finger with her tiny hand while Sarah burped her. The soft sigh she'd made when Sarah laid her down in her crib, already drifting off to sleep. 2 hours, Sarah continued. I gave her 2 hours to nap, just like always. When I went to check on her, she couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I had been the one to call 911 while Sarah held Emma's tiny, still body, whispering desperately for her to wake up, to breathe, to come back to us. The paramedics had worked on Emma for 23 minutes. I knew because I'd watched the clock on the nursery wall, counting every second, bargaining with time and God, and anyone who would listen. Just let her breathe. Just give us one more day, one more hour, one more minute. But time doesn't bargain, and prayers sometimes go unanswered, and sometimes perfectly healthy babies simply stop breathing for reasons no one can explain. I used to go into her room every night after the funeral, I confessed. I'd stand in the doorway and just listen, thinking maybe I'd hear her crying, that this had all been some horrible mistake. The silence was the worst part. Not just quiet. Silence. Complete and absolute. Sarah nodded. I know. I did the same thing. Sometimes I'd even catch myself getting up in the middle of the night when I heard what I thought was crying, only to realize it was the wind or a car outside or just my own desperate imagination. We'd both developed strange rituals in our grief, habits born from the sudden absence of the routines that had defined our days. Sarah had continued to set out Emma's bottles for 3 weeks after the funeral, washing them and arranging them in the drying rack out of pure muscle memory. I had kept checking the baby monitor, the receiver sitting silent on my nightstand like a monument to the quiet we couldn't escape. Do you remember how excited we were about these? Sarah picked up one of the small pink shoes, turning it over in her palm. We spent 2 hours at that baby store, trying to decide between these and the yellow ones with the ducks. I smiled, the memory cutting through the sadness like sunlight through clouds. You said pink was too presumptuous since we didn't know for sure she was a girl yet. I said yellow was playing it too safe. And then the salesperson suggested we buy both. And you looked at me like she'd suggested we mortgage the house for baby shoes. $32 for shoes she wouldn't even wear for months, I said, shaking my head. I thought it was highway robbery. But you bought them anyway. Both pairs, I admitted. And the matching socks. And that little headband with the flower that you said was ridiculously impractical but absolutely necessary. Sarah laughed. A real laugh this time. And the sound was like finding a photograph you thought you'd lost forever. We were so naive, weren't we? Thinking the hardest part would be deciding between pink and yellow shoes. Maybe naive isn't the right word, I said. Hopeful. We were hopeful. Same thing sometimes, but I didn't think it was the same thing. Naive suggested ignorance, a failure to understand reality. But hope was a choice. We had chosen to believe in Emma's future, to invest in her first steps, and all the steps that would follow. That wasn't foolish. It was love in its purest form. I put these away the day after the funeral, Sarah said, still holding the shoe. I couldn't bear to look at them, but I couldn't bear to get rid of them either. So I wrapped them in that blanket your mother made, and put them in a box with her hospital bracelet and the onesie she wore home from the hospital. I thought maybe someday I'd be strong enough to look at them again, but days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. And suddenly it had been 2 years, and I still couldn't face opening that box. I understood. Our house had become a museum of careful avoidance, rooms and closets and drawers we simply didn't open, spaces where Emma's presence lived on in the things we'd bought for her future. The nursery had remained untouched for 6 months before Sarah had finally asked me to pack everything away. Even then, we'd done it together in silence, wrapping each item like we were preparing it for a journey neither of us understood. What changed your mind today? I asked. What made you go up to the attic? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, rolling the tiny shoe between her palms. I had a dream about her last night. Not one of the scary ones where I can't save her, but a good dream. She was older, maybe 2 or 3, running around our backyard in a yellow sundress, chasing butterflies. She looked so real, so alive, so happy. When I woke up, instead of feeling sad, I felt grateful. Grateful that my subconscious could give me that gift, could show me a version of Emma who got to grow up. I reached for Sarah's hand, and she didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, but they intertwined with mine like they used to, like muscle memory taking over where words failed us. I've been having dreams too, I admitted. Different ones, but good ones. Sometimes she's a baby, sometimes she's older. In one, she was teaching me how to braid her hair, getting frustrated because I kept making it crooked. She had your patience with my incompetence. Sarah smiled through her tears. My patience? You're the one who spent 3 hours assembling that crib, taking it apart twice because you wanted it perfect. It had to be perfect for her, I said, remembering the weight of the instruction manual in my hands, the determination to get every screw exactly right. I kept thinking about how she'd spend her first nights in that crib, how it needed to be safe and sturdy and beautiful. I wanted her to know, even as a baby, that she was loved enough for someone to care about every detail. She knew, Sarah said with certainty that surprised me. Babies know. They feel love even when they can't understand it yet. All those nights when we'd stand over her crib just watching her breathe. All those times we'd argue about whether we were holding her too much or not enough. All the songs we sang. all the books we read to her belly before she was even born. She felt all of that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, Emma's shoe still resting in Sarah's palm like a small, sacred object. The afternoon light shifted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor, and I found myself thinking about time, how it moves differently when you're grieving, how days can feel like years, and years can feel like yesterday. "I went to her grave last week," I said quietly. "First time in months. I brought those wooden blocks your mom gave us, the ones with the alphabet. I know it sounds crazy, but I sat there and spelled out words for her. Simple ones at first. Love, Daddy, Mama, then longer ones. I told her about the promotion at work, about the new neighbors who have a dog that barks too much, about how the rose bush we planted for her is finally blooming." Sarah's thumb traced the edge of the tiny shoe. "What else did you tell her?" "That I was sorry. That I was sorry for pulling away from you, for making you grieve alone, for being so scared of the pain that I forgot we were supposed to be helping each other carry it." My voice cracked on the last words, but I pushed forward. I told her that her mama was the strongest person I knew, and that even though I couldn't figure out how to be strong myself, I was proud to be her daddy. "You are strong," Sarah said, finally looking up at me. "You're here. You're talking to me. You brought me this." She held up the shoe. "That took strength. I don't feel strong. I feel like I've been underwater for 2 years, just trying to remember how to breathe. Maybe that's what strength looks like sometimes," she said. "Maybe it's not about being fearless or having all the answers. Maybe it's just about showing up, even when everything hurts." I thought about that, about all the mornings I'd forced myself out of bed, all the times I'd gone through the motions of living when living felt impossible. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe survival itself was a kind of courage. "I miss talking to you," I said. Really talking. Not just about grocery lists and bills and whether to replace the furnace filter. I miss telling you about my day and hearing about yours. I miss laughing with you, even about stupid things. I miss us. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she scooted closer to me on the couch, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, familiar and comforting. "I miss us too," she said, "but I don't know how to get back there. I don't know how to be the person I was before, because that person existed in a world where Emma was alive. This person, this version of me, only knows how to live in a world where she's not. And sometimes I feel guilty for wanting to be happy again, like it would be betraying her memory." "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "Like if we start to heal, if we start to find joy again, it means we're forgetting her, or moving on, or that her life didn't matter enough to stay broken forever." "Yes," Sarah breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Exactly that. But look at this," I said, gesturing to the shoe in her hands. "Finding this, talking about her, remembering her. It doesn't feel like forgetting. It feels like the opposite. It feels like bringing her into this moment with us, like she's here in this room, listening to us finally say her name without falling apart." Sarah considered this, turning the shoe over in her hands like she was examining it from every angle. "You know what I realized when I was looking through her things in the nursery? Every single item in that room was chosen with love. Every blanket, every stuffed animal, every book we'd never get to read to her. And I started thinking about what Emma would want for us, if she could want anything. Would she want us to live in that room forever, surrounded by unused things? Or would she want us to carry that love forward, to find ways to honor her while still living? It was a question I'd never allowed myself to consider, too afraid of what the answer might demand of me. "What do you think she'd want?" "I think she'd want us to love each other," Sarah said without hesitation. "I think she'd want us to take care of each other the way we took care of her, even for such a short time. I think she'd want us to find ways to be happy that include her memory instead of despite it." The afternoon was growing later, the kitchen filling with the golden light that comes just before sunset. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was different now, marked by grief in ways that would never completely fade, but she was still Sarah, still the woman who cried at commercials about dogs finding their way home, who left love notes in my lunch bag, who sang off-key in the shower and didn't care who heard. "I want to try," I said. "I want to try to find our way back to each other, even if it looks different than before, even if we're different people now." "I want to try too," she said, "but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll keep talking about her. Promise me that if we do start to heal, if we do find happiness again, we won't pretend Emma never existed. She was real. She was ours. And she deserves to be remembered. I promise, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. She'll always be part of our story. Sarah reached for the photo album again, but this time her movements were more purposeful, less hesitant. "Can I show you something?" she asked, and I nodded, watching as she flipped through the pages with careful deliberation until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to a photo I'd forgotten existed. It was from the baby shower Sarah's sister had thrown for us, back when everything still felt possible, and the future stretched ahead of us like an uncharted but welcoming territory. In the photo, Sarah was sitting in a chair surrounded by gifts, her hands resting on her belly, laughing at something someone had just said. Her face was radiant with joy and anticipation, and I remembered standing behind the camera, feeling like the luckiest man alive. "I look at this picture sometimes," Sarah said, "and I try to remember what it felt like to be that happy, that hopeful. For a long time I resented that version of myself. I felt angry at her for being so naive, so confident that everything would work out. But lately, I've been thinking that maybe I shouldn't resent her. Maybe I should be grateful for her instead." I studied the photo more closely, remembering that day with sudden clarity. "I remember you opened those shoes that afternoon," I said. "Your mom had wrapped them separately from the rest of the outfit, and when you held them up, everyone got quiet for a moment. Because they were so tiny," Sarah said, smiling at the memory. "Everyone just stared at them, trying to imagine feet small enough to fit inside. Your dad made some joke about how they looked like doll shoes. And then Mrs. Henderson from next door started crying," I added, the memory becoming more vivid. "She said they reminded her of when her own kids were babies." "I thought she was being overly sentimental," Sarah said. "I had no idea then how powerful such small things could be, how much meaning they could hold." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us lost in that memory of a simpler time when the future felt secure, and our greatest worry was whether we'd picked the right color for the nursery. The contrast between that day and this one wasn't lost on either of us, but somehow it didn't feel as painful as it once had. Instead, it felt like a reminder that joy and sorrow weren't mutually exclusive, that we could hold both in our hearts simultaneously. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Sarah said, closing the album, but keeping her hand on its cover. "I've been thinking about what Emma would have been like, not in a sad way, but in a curious way. Whether she would have had your stubborn streak, or my tendency to overthink everything. Whether she would have been a morning person or a night owl. Whether she would have loved books or sports or music or all of the above. I think about that too," I admitted. "Especially when I see other kids her age. I wonder if she would have been the type to climb everything in sight, or if she would have been more cautious, more observant. I think she would have been a little bit of both," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Adventurous enough to keep us on our toes, but smart enough to think things through. She would have asked a million questions about everything. Why's the sky blue, Daddy? Why do birds fly? Why can't I stay up late?" I said, imagining Emma's voice, trying to picture what it might have sounded like. "And she would have been persistent," Sarah added, laughing softly. "She wouldn't have accepted, because I said so, as an answer. She would have kept asking until she got a real explanation. For the first time in years, we were talking about Emma not as a tragedy but as a person, imagining her personality and quirks, and the life she might have lived. It felt revolutionary, this shift from mourning what we'd lost to celebrating who she might have been. It didn't erase the pain, but it added something else to it. Love that wasn't defined by grief, hope that wasn't dependent on denial. "I want to do something," Sarah said suddenly, her voice taking on a tone I hadn't heard in a long time. Determined, purposeful. "I want to plant a garden for her. Nothing elaborate, just a small section of the backyard where we can grow flowers she might have liked. Sunflowers, maybe, because they're cheerful and bright, and daisies because they're simple and sweet." The idea hit me like a gentle wave, washing over me with unexpected warmth. "I love that," I said. "We could get a small bench, too, somewhere to sit when we want to feel close to her." "Yes," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up with the first genuine enthusiasm I'd seen from her in months. "And maybe we could make it a tradition to add something new each year on her birthday. A new flower, a wind chime, something that grows and changes even though she can't." I felt tears starting again, but they were different this time. Not the heavy, desperate tears of pure grief, but something lighter, something that felt almost like gratitude. She would have loved that, I said. She would have loved helping us plant things, getting her hands dirty, watching everything grow. We could start this weekend, Sarah said. If you want to, I mean. We could go to the garden center together, pick out seeds and plants, maybe get some of those child-sized gardening tools in case we ever need them for other little visitors. The implication of her words, that we might someday have a future where children were part of our lives again, whether our own or friends' kids or grandchildren, hung in the air between us. It wasn't a conversation we were ready to have fully, but it was a possibility we were finally able to acknowledge without it feeling like a betrayal of Emma's memory. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. Sarah reached over and took my hand, and I realized it was the first time we'd touched with intention rather than accident, in longer than I could remember. Her fingers were warm, familiar, and for a moment I felt like we were finding our way back to each other through the shared love of our daughter, rather than in spite of our shared loss. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice getting softer, more tentative. I've been thinking about going back to the cemetery. I haven't been since the funeral, and I know you've gone without me sometimes. I wasn't ready before, but I think I might be now. Would you come with me? The morning we decided to visit Emma's grave together. The sky was overcast, but not threatening rain. Sarah had suggested we go on a Sunday, and somehow that felt right. A day of rest, of reflection, of taking time for what mattered most. We drove in relative silence, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence that had filled our car for so many months. This silence felt different, purposeful, like we were both gathering our thoughts and emotions for what lay ahead. I had been to the cemetery probably a dozen times since the funeral, always alone, usually on my way home from work, when the weight of the day felt too much to carry straight into our empty house. I'd sit by her small headstone and talk to her, tell her about my day, about how her mother was doing, about how much we missed her. Sometimes I'd cry, sometimes I'd just sit quietly, but I always left feeling like I'd somehow connected with her, even if I couldn't explain how or why. Sarah had never been back. She'd told me once, months ago, that she was afraid of what she might feel there, afraid that seeing Emma's name carved in stone would make the loss feel too final, too permanent. I understood. We all grieve differently, and I'd never pushed her. But now, as we pulled into the cemetery parking lot, I could see her hands trembling slightly as she unbuckled her seatbelt. We can leave anytime you want, I told her, reaching over to cover her hand with mine. There's no pressure to stay or to feel anything specific. We're just here to be with her. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. I brought something, she said, pulling a small teddy bear from her purse. It was soft yellow, with a pink bow around its neck, one of the gifts we'd received at the baby shower that we'd never been able to use. I thought she might like to have it. My throat tightened with emotion. She would love it, I managed to say. We walked slowly along the winding path through the cemetery. I knew the way by heart now, past the old oak tree, around the bend where the morning glory vines climbed the fence, to the section where the newer graves lay in neat, carefully tended rows. As we approached Emma's grave, I felt Sarah's steps slow beside me, and I matched her pace, letting her set the rhythm for this moment. The headstone was small but beautiful, pink granite with delicate engravings of angels along the borders. Emma Grace Peterson, it read, followed by her birth and death dates. And below that, the words Sarah and I had chosen together in those first awful days. Forever in our hearts. Forever. Our baby girl. Sarah stopped about 3 feet away from the grave and just stared. I watched her face carefully, ready to catch her if the emotion became too overwhelming, but instead I saw something I hadn't expected, a kind of peaceful recognition, as if she was finally acknowledging a truth she'd been running from. She's really here, Sarah whispered, and it wasn't a question. She's really here, I confirmed. We stood together in silence for several minutes. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. A robin landed nearby and began pecking at the grass, completely unbothered by our presence. There was something comforting about the normalcy of it all, the way life continued its quiet rhythms even in this place set aside for remembering the dead. I brought flowers before, I told Sarah softly. Pink roses usually, but they never last very long. That's okay, she said. She knows they were beautiful when you brought them. Sarah stepped forward then, kneeling carefully on the grass beside the headstone. She placed the yellow teddy bear gently against the stone, adjusting its position several times until she was satisfied with how it looked. "Hi, sweetheart," she said in a voice so tender it made my chest ache. "Mommy and Daddy are here together to see you." I knelt down beside my wife, feeling the cool dampness of the earth through my jeans. Up close, I could see that someone, probably the cemetery groundskeepers, had been taking care of the area around Emma's grave. The grass was neatly trimmed, and there were no weeds growing among the small plantings we'd chosen months ago. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was scared, baby girl. I was scared that seeing you here would hurt too much, but I think I was really scared that it wouldn't hurt enough, that maybe I was starting to forget what it felt like to be your mommy." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she kept talking. "But I could never forget you, Emma. Never. You're part of me forever. Part of both of us forever. And I want you to know that Daddy and I are trying to take care of each other better now. We're trying to take care of your memory, too, to make sure it stays alive and beautiful." I found my own voice then. "We found your first shoes yesterday," I told the headstone, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking aloud to our daughter's grave with Sarah beside me. "The little white ones with the pink flowers that Grandma Sarah bought for you. They're perfect, just like you were perfect." Sarah looked at me with surprise, and something that might have been gratitude. I realized that in all my solo visits to this place, I'd never told her what I talked about with Emma, and she'd never asked. There had been this whole part of my grieving process that I'd kept separate from her, not out of any desire to exclude her, but because I hadn't known how to share it. "What else do you tell her when you come here?" Sarah asked. "Everything," I said honestly. "I tell her about work, about the neighbors, about how the roses in our garden are blooming. I tell her about you, about how beautiful you are when you smile, about how much I love you both. I tell her about the future sometimes too, about how I hope we'll be okay, how I hope we'll find our way back to happiness without leaving her behind." Sarah reached for my hand, and we sat there together in the grass beside our daughter's grave, holding on to each other and to the memory of the child who had connected us in ways we were only beginning to understand. The overcast sky had started to brighten, and shafts of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, warming our faces. "I want to start coming here with you," Sarah said after a while. "Not every time, maybe, but sometimes. I want to be part of those conversations you have with her." "I'd like that," I said. "I'd really like that." As we prepared to leave, Sarah touched the teddy bear one more time, making sure it was secure against the headstone. "We'll be back soon, sweetheart," she promised. "And next time, maybe we'll bring some of those pink roses Daddy likes to bring you." Walking back to the car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of completeness, not because our grief was gone, or because Emma was coming back, but because Sarah and I were finally grieving together instead of alone. We were finally honoring our daughter's memory as a team, as the parents she'd made us, as the family we'd always be. The weeks that followed our cemetery visit weren't magically easier, but they were different. Sarah and I began to move through our grief like dancers learning new choreography, sometimes stepping on each other's toes, sometimes finding perfect synchronization, always trying to stay connected to the same rhythm. We started small rituals that felt natural rather than forced. Every Sunday morning we'd make pancakes, the kind I'd imagined making for Emma when she got old enough to help mix the batter and inevitably spill flour everywhere. We'd eat them while looking through the photo albums we'd finally pulled out of storage, talking about what we thought she would have been like, what songs she might have loved, whether she would have inherited Sarah's stubbornness or my terrible sense of direction. The shoes remained on our bedroom dresser, no longer hidden but not quite shrine-like either. They became a natural part of our space, a gentle reminder, rather than a source of pain. Sometimes I'd catch Sarah touching them absently while getting ready in the morning, the same way she used to touch my arm when she walked past me in the kitchen, an unconscious gesture of love and connection. About a month after our cemetery visit, Sarah brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. We were lying in bed on a Saturday morning, that lazy golden light filtering through the curtains, when she turned to face me and said, "I've been thinking about the future differently lately." "How so?" I asked, stroking her hair the way I used to before everything fell apart. "I used to think that healing meant moving on from Emma. leaving her behind so we could have a normal life again. But I don't think that's what healing is anymore. I think healing is learning how to carry her with us, how to build a life that includes her memory instead of avoiding it. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I don't know if I'll ever want to try again, to have another baby. That might be something that changes, or it might not. But what I do know is that I want to have a life with you that honors what we've been through, that acknowledges we're parents, even though our daughter isn't here. I understood what she meant. For months I'd felt like I was living in limbo. Not quite a father, but not a father either. Not quite a husband, but not divorced. Not quite grieving, but not healed. Sarah was talking about finding a way to inhabit our identities fully, as Emma's parents, as survivors, as people who loved deeply enough to have their hearts broken, and were brave enough to keep loving anyway. What would that look like? I asked. I'm not sure yet, she admitted. Maybe it means we volunteer with families going through loss. Maybe it means we create some kind of memorial fund. Maybe it just means we have friends over for dinner again, and don't pretend we never had a daughter. Maybe it means we travel to places we always wanted to take her and carry her memory with us there. Over the following months, we tried different things. Sarah started attending a support group for mothers who had lost children, and eventually, I joined a group for fathers. We didn't go to process our grief away, but to learn how to carry it more skillfully, how to support each other better, how to recognize that our love for Emma didn't have to be a source of isolation, but could actually connect us to other people who understood. We did start volunteering, first at the hospital where Emma had spent her brief life, then with an organization that supported families navigating infant loss. It was hard work, often heart-wrenching, but it felt purposeful in a way nothing had since Emma died. We were using our experience, our hard-won wisdom about grief and survival, to help other people feel less alone in their darkest moments. The first time someone thanked us for sharing our story, for helping them feel like they weren't going crazy with grief, I understood what Sarah had meant about building a life that included Emma's memory. Our daughter's brief existence had changed us, had taught us things about love and loss and resilience that we never would have learned otherwise. Using those lessons to help other people wasn't moving on from Emma. It was honoring what she'd given us. A year after finding the shoes in the attic, we decided to have a small celebration of Emma's life. Not a funeral or a memorial service, but something that felt more like a birthday party for someone who couldn't be there in person, but was definitely there in spirit. We invited close family and friends, made a cake, shared stories and memories, released pink balloons that probably annoyed some environmentalist somewhere, but felt right in the moment. My mother brought a photo album she'd been secretly working on, pictures of Emma, pictures of Sarah pregnant, pictures of us as new parents, all arranged with little captions and decorative papers. I wanted her to have a baby book, Mom explained, tears in her eyes. Every baby deserves a baby book. Sarah's sister brought a small tree in a pot, a dogwood that would bloom pink flowers every spring. For your backyard, she said, so Emma can grow with you in a different way. Standing in our living room that day, surrounded by people who loved us and loved Emma even though they'd barely known her, I felt something I'd thought was lost forever. Joy. Not the carefree joy of before, but a deeper, more complex happiness that could coexist with sadness, that could acknowledge loss while still celebrating love. That night, after everyone had gone home and we'd cleaned up the celebration debris, Sarah and I sat on our bedroom floor, with Emma's baby book spread out between us, and the little shoes resting nearby. Do you think we're doing okay? Sarah asked. Do you think we're honoring her memory the right way? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw someone who had been through hell and come out the other side not unscathed but transformed. Someone who had learned how to love more deeply, because she'd experienced loss more profoundly. Someone who had figured out how to be Emma's mother, even though Emma couldn't be physically present to be mothered. I think we're doing something better than okay, I said. I think we're showing Emma how much we love her by learning how to love each other again. I think we're giving her the gift of parents who didn't let grief make them smaller, who let it make them more compassionate instead. As I write this now, 2 years after that afternoon in the attic, I can say that we're not the same people we were before Emma died. We never will be. But we're not broken either. We're something new. People who have learned that love doesn't end with death, that family doesn't require everyone to be physically present, that hope can coexist with heartbreak. Emma's shoes still sit on our dresser, still waiting for feet that will never fill them. but they're no longer a symbol of what we lost. They're a reminder of what we gained, the privilege of being Emma's parents, the depth of love we discovered we were capable of, the strength we found in each other when everything else fell apart. Sometimes people ask us if we've gotten over it, as if grief were a cold you could recover from completely. We've learned to say, gently but firmly, that we haven't gotten over it, and we don't want to. We've gotten through it. We've grown around it. We've learned to dance with it. But getting over it would mean leaving Emma behind, and that's something we'll never do. Our daughter lived for 17 days, but she'll be part of our story for the rest of our lives. And somehow, that doesn't feel tragic anymore. It feels like the most beautiful love story we'll ever be part of. A love so strong it transcends physical presence, so deep it transforms everything it touches, so enduring it will outlast even us. The shoes are waiting, and they always will be. And we're finally okay with that.